This week on Oasis by the Sea, Pastor Keith teaches the not entirely empty tomb from the book of John, chapter 20, verses 1 to 18.
We were listening to Jess, and she talked about how this was the victory, but we were the prize. And then my eyes just there's tears everywhere. That's amazing stuff. I hope you heard that. I hope you heard you're the prize. If that's how much God cared about you, that he fought for you, that he bought you, that he planned for you, that he loves you, that he wants you. I hope you heard that. I hope you know that. I don't think there's a better thing to know that the God of the universe thinks you are a prize. That's not the sermon. I just thought I just had to say that. The not entirely empty tomb. We talked about the empty tomb. Last week we talked about the crucifixion. We talked about John's experience. So I'm really going to bear down on that again, of John's experience of these events. The book of John is very personal. He's writing from a very personal perspective. It was his experience of the crucifixion. It's going to be his experience of the resurrection. And he's going to talk very much from what he felt, what he saw, not what anyone else did, what he did, what he felt. And we talk about the empty tomb because this is one of the things that they encounter. It's a mystery. You know, it's funny. I think about a resurrected Christ, and I think of all the ways that he could have revealed that he was resurrected. I don't know, fire in the sky or lightning bolts or, I have resurrected. It'd be cool. Except that's not how it happened. It unveiled little by little. It came out piece by piece. God planned for it that way for some reason. God planned for it to take a little bit for everybody to figure out what was going on. That's how he chose to reveal his resurrection. It was a bit of a mystery. Our classic modern detective stories revolve around murder. That someone killed someone else, but the person who's dead's not a witness, and the person who murdered them isn't saying anything. And so they have to pick at the details till they find the truth. This is a totally different situation. Everyone knows who killed Jesus. Everyone knows he's dead. That's not a mystery. The mystery is, where's the body? Where's the body? Look, the entire premise of Christianity rests upon the answer to that question. If the body was stolen and he stayed dead, Christianity is false and we are wasting our time here. If that's not what happened to the body, then that's a very, very, very important piece of information, because people historically haven't died and then quit dying and then lived. That would be very historically important if that's true. So this is a really, really important question. It is really the question that they're wrestling with after the crucifixion, because there's not a body. We got to figure out what happened. This all took place over 2,000 years ago. None of us can go back and look for ourselves. All we can do is look at the testimonies that were left behind. And we typically talk about 4 testimonies we have to the resurrection. They're the 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And each of them is a different account. In fact, a very different account. Next slide. Do the testimonies support the claim that Jesus rose, or do they disprove that Jesus rose? Critics of the Bible would say that the discrepancies, and when I say discrepancies, the fact that not all 4 accounts are identical, would point to discrediting the testimony. That would be what critics of the Bible would say. I'm going to, full disclosure here, there's a guy named J. Warner Wallace who wrote a book called Cold Case Christianity. He is a professional cold case detective. In other words, all the facts are in the past, and he's trying to piece together the truth later in the future with evidence. I'm not going to tell you every time that I reference or think about, but his work in that book has greatly influenced the way I see this encounter. But I would tell you that if we look at the testimonies the way a real prosecutor or a real detective would look at the testimonies, they don't weaken the argument, they strengthen the argument. Let's start with some base ideas. First of all 4 Gospels have an account. They all have different details. We've got that part. But those critics weren't very good detectives. If the resurrection was a lie, then we have a conspiracy. Does everyone follow me with that? The only way the resurrection could be a lie is if dozens of people conspired together to propagate a lie, and then they did it for years, a long time, 30, 40, 50 years. Some of these people continue to live after this moment. So it's a conspiracy held together by a group of people for a very long time. Conspiracies have some commonalities to them. There's things that hold conspiracies together. There are things that tear conspiracies apart. And it is hard work to maintain a conspiracy. In America, we had a famous conspiracy called Watergate. Some very powerful men managed to hold the lie together for about 7 days. That's how long they managed the conspiracy for, and then it just all fell apart. Very powerful, experienced, good lying men who were very, very experienced at lying, couldn't hold it together for 7 days. So, to prove a conspiracy, we'll look for flags that indicate lies. One of the flags that we would look for in a conspiracy is that all the stories would be too much the same. I want you to imagine this. I want you to imagine that if 4 of you were attended today, church, and then the same 4 of you were asked by somebody else what happened in church today, can you imagine how weird it would be if all 4 of you said exactly the same thing? Like that would be bizarre. One of you would remember more about the songs, one of you would remember more about the sermon. Even with the sermon, some of you would remember one thing, someone else would be like, I don't even remember that part. Wouldn't that be normal? Normal is varied accounts. That's what real witnesses do. If the stories are too much the same, that's a flag. It means it's been rehearsed. It means you all agreed. Hey guys, what are we all going to say? So that's a flag. I've never been part of a murder investigation, but I've been part of a major car accident. I can tell you that the accounts of the major car accident were very different depending on where you were in the accident. So that's one of the types of things that we're going to be looking for today, these kinds of flags. Let's get into our case. Jesus died 3 days ago. John picks up first thing Sunday morning. Let's start with John 20, verses 1 and 2. Now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came early to the tomb while it was still dark and saw the stone had already been taken away from the tomb. And so she ran and came to Simon Peter and to the other disciple whom Jesus loved and said to them, they have taken away the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him. If we go back one slide, the blue part, disciple whom Jesus loved, if you haven't been following us along, that means John. John never refers to himself by name any time in the entire book of John, so if he says somebody else and doesn't use the name, he's talking about himself. So he's saying that she ran, came to Simon Peter and John himself, and then she said that stuff to them. And that's the next slide, which is they've taken away the Lord out of the tomb. We don't know where they have laid him. The other Gospels account for more women, up to 5 women, which John doesn't mention. Why doesn't John mention them? Because 5 women didn't come to his house. Mary came to his house. The other 4 women did some other things. They actually went and called some other disciples. There's a lot going on this morning. It is a busy morning. Some women went to the tomb, found it empty, and everyone went nuts, and people are going everywhere. Mary gets sent to go find Peter and John. So John remembers Mary because that's who came to his door. That makes sense. So his memory of this entire event starts this way. It starts with Mary coming to his door and relating, I went this morning, we went to the tomb, it was empty, and I ran to come get you guys. That's his beginning of this moment. That's exactly how real testimonies go. John's testimony is angled to what he directly experienced, and that's Mary. What does he remember next? John 23 and 4. Peter therefore went forth, and the other disciple, that's John again, remember? Other disciple, not mention the name, that's always John, and they were running. They're going to the tomb, and the 2 were running together, and the other disciple ran ahead faster than Peter and came to the tomb first. I ran faster than you did. What guy wouldn't include that in his testimony? We had a foot race across town, and I was faster. That just smacks of reality, doesn't it? Like, why even say that if it's not true? Well, what kind of random piece of information is that? Oh, and I outran my friend Peter. That's great. Oh, yeah. John remembers needing to get to the tomb. He remembers beating Peter in a foot race to get across town. He could have run with Peter, right? We just talked about a race. He could have run with him. They weren't actually racing. Nah, he had to get to the tomb first. This was urgent. He's not driven by, let's do this together. No. I'm going to get there as fast as I possibly can. It paints this picture of their energy, their focus, their urgency, the importance of this to them, that one won't even wait for the other. He's got to get there. Now, surely if John is trying to lie to paint himself as a hero, he would have gone all the way. John the hero outruns his companion and boldly enters the tomb, except that isn't the truth. John peeks in, but he can't go in. And now just a few more points. If John is now at the tomb, other accounts say there were guards. John doesn't mention guards. Why? I'm just going to let you understand. A significant amount of time has now passed. We know from the book of Matthew that the guards were plenty frightened and that they went back to their authorities and said, hey, everything went wrong here. There's no body. There's been plenty of time for them to leave. The ladies went in the morning, then they found out it was empty, then they had to go across town to get the guys, then they had to run back. Guards are long gone. John never saw any guards. Guards aren't part of John's story. He never saw them. He never really talked about them. They're not a big deal to him. So the guards are gone. John never saw any. They aren't on his mind. But what John does remember is a big moment for him. A very, very, very big moment that is very specific to this account. Let's read John 20, 8 through 10. And stooping and looking in, he saw the linen wrappings there, but he did not go in. I'm behind. I'm going to read this anyway. Simon Peter therefore also came following him and entered the tomb, and he beheld the wrappings lying there, and the face cloth which had been on his head, not lying with the linen wrappings, but rolled up in a place by itself. And I already talked about this. John remembers desperately needing to get to the tomb, only being unable to enter once he gets there. Now the next verse. So the other disciple who came first to the tomb entered then also. So now John's in the tomb, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not understand the scripture that he must rise again from the dead. So the disciples went away again to their own home. John remembers believing something. Amongst theologians, there's argument about what John actually believed because of that verse 9 where it says, as yet they did not understand that Jesus was supposed to come back. I want to tell you that the process of believing before we fully understand is actually pretty common. John wasn't sure what he understood, but he was beginning to once again believe. This is huge. Just days ago, they were in this upper room. They were setting up this communion thing. Jesus was introducing it for the first time. Jesus talks about all this stuff. And I don't remember the sermon, or if you remember the sermon about that, there was a theme of believing in that whole conversation. And then when Jesus prays to the Father, the longest prayer of Jesus in the whole Bible, one of his big focuses, Lord, thank you that they have believed. They needed to believe. And now they weren't believing in the resurrection yet. It was just whether they believed in who Jesus was, his identity, what he was about, where he was from. They believed that. You know what they've been struggling with for the last few days? Belief. He just died. They're struggling. They're wrestling. How could it be true? We believed. Was it true? So he walks in and he sees something on that stone slab that challenges him. He sees the grave clothes folded very neatly and the head thing curled up, rolled up and set at the head. That's weird. Let me explain to you why that's weird. Remember last time, maybe if you were here last week, you learned there was about 60 kilos of goopy spices mixed with these wrappings and then wrapped around him like a mummy. Okay, let's look at the possibilities of what might have happened. Let's say somebody decides to move the body of Jesus. Why would you take that off? He smells bad now. There's rigor mortis. What are you doing? For someone like me who hates getting their hands messy, this is a nightmarish thought. This would be gross. This is absolutely disgusting. And even if you did that, how would that end up neatly folded? Wouldn't it just be in a pile of yuck muck on the floor? None of this scene makes any sense. It doesn't make any sense of any kind. And now John is looking at these things, and things are starting to... I remember him feeding 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. I remember him calming a storm. I remember him telling Lazarus to walk out of that grave. Whoa, boy, what just happened? What happened? Because the evidence of this almost empty tomb doesn't make any sense, except Jesus keeps doing things that doesn't make sense. He's been doing things that don't make sense The whole 3 years we've been together, this is the thing he does. Maybe he doesn't understand yet what it means, yet the spark has relit and he believes. He's not sure what he believes. He's not sure what it means. But that doubt that he had, whether Jesus was the real thing or not, just got shucked out the window. He's back. He is back. He believes. That crisis of faith is over. I mean, if the tomb had been completely empty, then maybe Mary was right. Maybe someone took the body. But now something is not adding up. He doesn't know what's happening. He can't explain what he's seeing or why, but hope has flooded his heart. Hope in Jesus. Sometimes belief doesn't happen all at once. Do you know that? You know, some people meet Jesus in a very close amount of time. Some people meet Jesus over years. And when did you actually start believing? I couldn't tell you. It happened, though. I totally believe. That's okay, by the way, if you're on that journey. If you're in the middle of that belief, I get it. The next thing that John remembers is Mary bringing testimony to his belief. So he's seen the room, he's seen the evidence, he's seen the stuff that doesn't make sense. Something is sparked in him, and now the next thing John remembers is Mary giving it reality. Let's look at John 20, 11 through 18. But Mary was standing outside the tomb weeping. So this was afterwards, right? So Mary had come and told John and Peter. John and Peter race. Mary already ran once. She already ran to go get them. She's probably walking now. By the time she gets there, now they're gone again already. Okay, I'm just trying to explain what's going on. This is hours of time. Now she's still stuck. Mary's still stuck. She's outside the tomb weeping. And so as she wept, she stooped and looked inside the tomb. And she beheld two angels in white sitting, one at the head and one at the feet, where the body of Jesus had been lying. And they said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" And she said to them, "Because they have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." When she had said this, she turned around and beheld Jesus standing there, and did not know that it was Jesus. Hold on to that thought. That's an important thought. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." And she turned and said to him in Hebrew, "Rabboni," which means teacher. And Jesus said to her, "Stop clinging to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brethren and say to them, I ascend to my Father and your Father, and my God and your God." Mary Magdalene came announcing to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord," and that he had said these things to her. And so what John is describing is that testimony that he received when she came back. She comes in and she goes, "This is what Jesus told me to say. I'm telling you." Whew, busy day. Lots of stuff happening. John remembers Mary come to him flush, panting, having just run from the tomb to his house. And he remembers his own race to the tomb and finding the courage to enter and seeing that things made no sense, that spark of hope. And then Mary with her testimony of what happened after she got back to the tomb. She had seen Jesus. John remembers hearing her breathless story and a spark of belief blooming into indescribable hope. This is John's story, not somebody else's story. It's his story, his moments that he remembers, the details that still burn in his mind all these years later, probably 30 years after this has happened, that he's putting it to paper with a pen, and it's like yesterday, and he's experiencing it again, and he's writing it down. But I want to return to one detail that I highlighted in blue. Mary did not recognize Jesus right away. Why do all the Gospels, by the way, all the Gospels, every single one of them, all four of them, have some detail about doubt or Jesus being with someone, but they didn't know it was Jesus yet? All four of them. So you have all these different things that don't agree, right? Then you have this one thread that's exactly the same. Nobody knew who he was at first. What a weird thing. One of the things that investigators look for in testimonies are thematic details. True testimonies are always different, but they always have some key details that are the same. And all four Gospels accounts have this thing. So let's imagine that this had been a conspiracy again. Let's imagine that this was all these dozens of people coming up with a conspiracy, trying to come up with the lie. Imagine them coming up with this one. I know what we do. We all say Jesus came back, but we didn't know it was him. How much sense does that make? Just about zero, doesn't it? Why would you do that? That makes your testimony weaker, not stronger. Why in the world would you come together and come up with this lie, say, what are we going to make sure everyone says, I know? We'll all say, we didn't know. We saw Jesus, who we've lived with for the past 3 years. We've eaten meals with him, we've traveled with him, we've done all this stuff with him, and then we saw him, we had no idea it was him. That's going to sound crazy. That's the strangest thing to agree on I can possibly think of. How would that make the story more believable? And here's the thing, it doesn't make the story more believable. If you're going to go to all that work to clamp down on that one detail, then why have so many other details that didn't fit exactly together, that you have to work on a little bit? Why make that one fit and then have all this other stuff that doesn't exactly fit? See, academics sitting in libraries or meeting rooms pile the 4 accounts together and can find details that are different and claim, job done, Bible contradicts itself. Actual investigators who evaluate lies for a living look at the accounts and become more and more convinced that it's true the longer they look, because it doesn't fit together like lies fit together. People who study lies don't read this and find lies. They find the truth, as strange as the truth may be. These accounts aren't engineered for the greatest believability. They're not massaged until they fit as easily together. They're all like how real people in the real world tell stories when they're telling the truth. And 2,000 years later, it's still how real people give real testimonies in the real world. Messy, disoriented a little bit, things of impossible details that are somehow the same, that make no sense unless they're true. But it does beg the question, why didn't anyone recognize Jesus right away? I can only guess at that. I can give you a couple possible scenarios. One of them is, we know from Isaiah that by the time he was done with the cross, his face wasn't recognizable to anybody. He'd been beaten in the face too much. Look, if he still got the holes in his hands and the hole in his side, how much facial damage was left after the crucifixion? I can't answer that question. But I don't know if you've ever looked on the internet at the face of someone who's been badly beaten, before and after pictures, and it can be very dramatic difference in appearance. That may be all it was. It could be more. Luke uses the phrase, their eyes were opened, in 1 Corinthians 15:20. I'm going to read you 2 verses out of 1 Corinthians. But now Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who are asleep. Then verse 53, for this perishable will have to put on the imperishable, and this mortal must put on the immortality. Here's another possibility. The Bible tells us that we're going to have eternal bodies that don't age, don't get sick. They're going to be the same, but not the same. We also know that when Jesus came back from the dead, he had one of those versions. He had body 2.0. I don't know what body 2.0 looked like. I don't know how much different it is. I don't know if it's enough different that you go, that's you. See, I don't know how that works because I haven't experienced body 2.0. But there's a couple different possibilities as to why someone might look at Jesus after the resurrection and not know right away, and they go, oh, that's you. Especially after they heard him talk. That's been one of the things that's been a bit of a thing. They heard him talk and then it all clicks easier. Other people were raised from the dead in Scripture and then died again. Jesus raised to something else. Jesus raised to the kind of body we will have forever that will be different. But no matter the cause, and I believe it was true. See, I read the account in the Bible and it rings true to me. They struggled to match the person who they were talking with Jesus, who they knew. They struggled with that. Mary struggled with that. I believe it. But it doesn't matter the cause, because it's absolutely bizarre to think that liars would purposely put that in their testimony. To me, that's a mark on the side of believing, not disbelieving. And I have one other thought about just how Jesus puts this together. You know, Jesus could have announced this to Peter. And he said, could have said, Peter, you're the rock. You're the default leader. When I'm not around, I've kind of put you in charge a little bit. When I leave, you're going to be in charge of the church. Peter, you announce to everybody that I'm resurrected. You know who he picks? A woman. Ladies, a lot has happened in time about how we listen to women's testimonies. I'm afraid that at the time period, that wasn't considered as good a testimony. But not only that, there's Mary Magdalene, who had been demon-possessed by 7 demons. That doesn't do a lot for your testimony either. God picked the person who they were going to have the most faith to have to believe. Of all the people that God could have said, you're the one I want you to announce, and you're the one I want them to believe, he picked the one that was going to require the most faith, not the least. And he did it on purpose. He said, I'm not going to appear to you in a way that you instantly understand. I'm going to appear to you in a way that you have to work through it. He said, I'm not going to just show up with lightning bolts and thunder. I'm going to show you an empty tomb. I'm going to make you work through it. Jesus' whole appearance, everything, all the The resurrection story, I could teach it with flash, but the truth of it is that it unraveled one piece at a time. He peeled it back slowly. It's the way he chose to reveal himself, and it required faith, because believing in Jesus will always require faith. It's supposed to require faith. He didn't make it easy to do without faith. He ensured faith was part of the picture for everybody. Everybody got to do faith. So what do we do with this? Well, let's go with number one. Don't let amateurish efforts to discredit the Bible discourage you. It is easy for somebody to grab a couple things, rip out a few verses, say these two things are different, and try to make some sort of argument that the Bible is contradictory. The truth of the matter is that people who do this sort of thing for an actual living don't agree. This is a very solid testimonial account. Despite the strangeness of what's being testified, the actual testimony itself is extremely sound. Number two, if your belief is still developing, keep searching, keep going, keep digging, keep moving, keep growing. Don't stand still. Don't stay here. Take another step. Find out more. Read more. Get more information. The Bible can stand. It's trustworthy. Don't leave this half done. If Jesus really is who he says he is, that's an important thing to understand in our life, and it has massive implications. Don't leave this kind of half-answered in your life. It's either true and it makes a massive difference, or it's false and this is a massive waste of time. But there isn't an in-between spot. Number three, let your story be your story and tell it. Do you know how to tell your testimony of how you met Jesus if you know Jesus? Do you know your story doesn't need to sound like anyone else's story? Any more than the four Gospels had to tell the exact same perspective of the resurrection. No, what we needed was four different perspectives on the resurrection. That's what we needed. And that's what the world needs. The world doesn't need your testimony to be my testimony. The world needs 1,000 different testimonies of power. That's what the world needs. If your testimony sounded like mine and then it sounded like someone else, it would just sound fake anyway. One testimony may be discounted. Two testimonies are more difficult. Millions of unique individual testimonies held together by the threads of God's forgiveness and grace. That's compelling. One after another, different but the same, different but the same, different but the same. Over and over again, unique, individual, my journey, my story. It's different, yet at the core, it's the same. That is compelling. And when we as a body tell that story, not just me, but us, there starts to be a weight and a reality and a surety that this is important and worth listening to. When that's the way the message comes. So we need to know how to tell our story, and we need to be telling our story. Do we know how to defend our faith? We need to know how to do that too. And if you're ready to believe, I am here anytime to talk with you about believing in Jesus and what that means and how we move forward from that moment that John had when he looked at the clothes on the bench and he went, I don't yet understand, but I believe. If that's where you are, let's talk. Let's pray.
You've been listening to Oasis by the Sea. Thank you so much for joining us today. May God richly bless you until we see you next week at the Oasis.